This video deals with ethics and social responsibility, particularly in the context of marketing. When we think of ethics, we think of doing the right thing. We think of the debate between what is right and what is wrong. And we can trace that back to very ancient philosophical writings, the writings of Plato and Aristotle. The old problem was, should we always repay our debts? If we have a debt, should we always repay them? And of course most people would say yes, we should. That's the moral thing to do. But what if you had just borrowed a gun from your neighbour and you found out later that your neighbour had become mentally unstable? Now, should you give the gun back to your neighbour? So there are issues. There are always dilemmas when we consider ethics and we consider what's right and wrong. And when we confront one of these dilemmas, all we can do is discuss it and try and highlight issues and try to then decide what is right and what is wrong. But the subject itself does not give us definitive answers. It just simply helps us to think about the issue. Laws, for example, mostly incorporate ethical positions. We shouldn't murder people because, well, it's wrong, it's unethical, but we also codify it in law. It's also illegal. So we have a sort of societal dimension to it, and it's punishable. If we do it, we're going to be punished. But it's also an ethical position. We simply should not kill people because it is wrong. It is wrong to deprive someone of life. But likewise, in business, for example, it's wrong to cheat the customer, to give the customer misleading signals in marketing that the product is of a certain price, a certain quality, has certain attributes, and when the customer buys it, finds out it hasn't. It's unreliable or it's shoddy workmanship. So there are ethical principles that seem to cut across nearly all functions of our lives as to what's right, what's wrong. Culture dictates what's right and wrong. So right changes from culture to culture. And I suppose it's reasonable to say that that's what culture is. It's a number of people who subscribe to a particular ethical stance. It's groups of people who believe in certain things, and they constitute the culture within the country or within a particular area. They believe certain things, and that marks them off from other people who may believe in different things. So in some parts of the world, in the past in particular, headhunting was quite acceptable. Go out and kill someone and take their head. To other people at that time, headhunting was immoral. It was wrong. So one culture believed it and another culture did not believe it. So our idea of what's right and wrong is conditional almost. It's easy for us to impose our values and to start judging societies and other people by our values. And we find that invariably we're right and they're wrong. But that's not the way it should be. What we should be looking for are some overriding principles of morality. And that's what the study of ethics does. It tries to lead us towards some overarching principles that cut across all cultures and all times. The downside of everything I'm saying at the moment is that that has not happened. The study of ethics leads to the study of ethics, or so it would appear. It doesn't necessarily lead to solutions or to outcomes, and it doesn't tell us categorically how to behave in certain situations. That's conditional on the time in which we live, and the culture in which we live, our own experiences, our our family experiences, our educational experiences, our own personal histories, the history of the society in which we live. It's conditional on so many aspects. So we don't have definitive answers. That does not mean we shouldn't study ethics. We should, because looking for the answer is very important. And simply being exposed to the various dilemmas that were thrown up in philosophical debate in itself help us to clarify our thinking on certain issues. It may not give us the precise answers, but it helps us to think about the issues more logically and more lucidly, more clearly. So we have the culture and norms of the society. And if we subscribe to those norms of society, to those rules of society, to those beliefs of the society, then in a sense we're a well-adjusted member of that society. Of course, if we dissent from the culture of the society, then we are outcasts and we're at variance with that culture, and I suppose in a sense we're on a collision course. We have conflict. So we start, however, with the culture and norms of the society. And within that, we get the business culture and practices, because businesses are a part of the culture, they're a part of the society. So it's almost logical to suggest that because the culture believes in certain things, and that is pervasive, that's all over that particular region or area, that culture, then the businesses that operate within that area will have the same culture. The people who are running the business will have the culture, and they will reflect the culture of the area. I should mention at this point that businesses really do not have a culture. People have culture. Businesses are production units. They are commercial enterprises. They're legal entities, perhaps. But as legal entities or production units or business enterprises, they don't have culture. People within the organizations have culture. The chief executive of the business has a culture, but the business itself doesn't have one. Mostly because, in a sense, the business does not exist. The business is just a collection of people making products that are sold on the market, sold in the anticipation of profit. The business may be registered with the government. It's a legal entity, but itself is not capable of right or wrong. It's only the people in the business that are capable of right and wrong. So when we talk about business culture, we're really talking about the culture of the people within the business, not the business itself. Businesses do not have a morality. It's the people within the business who run the business who have the morality and who determine the conduct of the business. So from the business culture, nonetheless, having said all of that, we move to the wider corporate culture. So we use the terms wider corporate culture and business culture, but we should remember it is actually the people in the business who have the culture, not the business. The business is just a legal entity. It's a business unit. It's a production unit. It's a retailing unit, whatever it is. But it doesn't have a culture. It's the people who have the culture. But having said all of that, this is the language of business, the language of the business literature. So we'll stick with it and we'll talk about corporate culture and business culture. But bear in mind, that's really what we're talking about. And of course, from the wider corporate culture, we go to personal morality, how we behave and what we believe is right and wrong. So if our morality is that we cheat, for example, we make products and we cheat the customer, then that would go into business practice. And the business will then make products that cheat the customer. Perhaps we advertise that the product has got certain qualities and it doesn't have. It doesn't have those qualities. Now, early views of morality, well, it's difficult to know where to start. As I said, we could start with Plato and Aristotle thousands of years ago, or we could start, well, pick a point. But in the early 1900s, there were different principles. One principle, for example, was caveat emptor. Now, it's a Latin phrase that means let the buyer beware. So this puts all the pressure on the buyer. In other words, the business doesn't have to worry too much about the product or what it claims of the product. It's the buyer who has to be careful. This is a one-way street. The buyer has to make all the decision and be careful about the product and make sure the product is the right quality and has the right attributes. And there was almost no responsibility, or very little responsibility, on the part of the seller. It sees the responsibility for the purchase and the quality of the goods and services with the buyer. So it pushes everything over to the buyer, and it doesn't seem very fair, particularly when the product may be very technical. If it has a lot of technicality, in today's world perhaps a lot of electronics and circuit boards and so on, buyers are not experts. The buyers have a particular function in mind. They're not going to go to a computer shop and disassemble some computer and test all its components before they buy it. It's not realistic. So the idea of this, let the buyer beware, maybe back then as a starting point we can understand the logic of it, but it did put all the pressure onto the buyer. There's a belief that competition in the marketplace corrects abuses, that if a company does cheat, word will get round about the company cheating the customer and the company will go out of business. People will stop buying the product. That was the belief. So it was the belief that competition would fix any mismatch between what was claimed and what was delivered. So the market would fix any issues, and in a sense the market enforced morality. The ethics of competition, well, we have all sorts of issues when we deal with competition. We could start by talking about different competitive positions and the morality of monopolies selling single products and so on. But that's dealt with adequately in other videos. But let's get in sort of slightly differently into this one and say we could have issues like, say, economic espionage, stealing trade secrets. Now that's clearly wrong. Companies deserve privacy. They deserve to be able to secure their intellectual property and to stop people from stealing the intellectual property. Now we know in today's world there are dedicated hackers in computers who are trying to steal information for commercial reasons. There are countries who are promoting this and trying to steal information from companies about products and about the science because they themselves can't afford or they don't want to spend money on research and development. So it's easier to steal ideas. So that's a clear case of an ethical issue. But it could include trespassing and wiretapping. Trespassing means coming onto the property, either physically or coming onto the property in a virtual sense, i.e. tapping into their network and stealing the ideas off a database, or actually physically going onto the property and breaking in and stealing the ideas, or wiretapping, listening in on computer networks, or even listening in on phone calls to see what they can pick up. It's cheating, it's immoral, it's wrong, but unfortunately we know it happens. But it could be also in the form of bribes. Companies may bribe officials to be able to sell in certain markets, or bribe officials to get things done quickly. In many countries, import and export, for example, in order to get the goods through the customs and through the port fast, maybe the officials have to be bribed. A sum of cash may have to be given to somebody to try and promote the paperwork to get the products through efficiently. Or there are kickbacks. In other words, when everything's gone through, even though it's gone through, they go back and pay people who have helped in expediting the service. In other words, jumping the queue and being unfair to others who don't engage in this sort of practice. Again, it's immoral. It's wrong. And it's trying to gain an advantage out of people using their authority wrongly. People who are in charge of situations, perhaps in charge of imports and exports and so on, using their position within government to promote certain companies and certain products simply because they're being paid quietly in the background by that company. So it is wrong. As I said, it's common in some developing nations, but I think it's fair to say that every country should be wary of it. The potential for it happening anywhere is there. Moral idealism and utilitarianism. These are two big approaches to ethics. Moral idealism is there is a right thing to do, no matter what the cost. So the right thing to do must be done no matter what the cost is. It's favoured by religious and consumer groups. So no matter what the cost, they must do it. They must act in certain ways because they believe that that is the right thing to do. That's the ethical position, and that can't be compromised. That can't be negotiated away or changed. So it's moral idealism. It's the very strict application of a moral code to a situation. It's fundamental. It's not negotiable. Utilitarianism, well, that's doing the right thing, and doing the right thing means what hurts the fewest people. It's favoured by business executives and the military. Utilitarianism started around the 1870s with people like Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill, but there were many involved in its development, and what it was trying to do was get the greatest good for the greatest number of people. Whereas moral idealism does not compromise at all. Utilitarianism is trying to maximize the return to the greatest number, knowing full well that there are some people who will not benefit from that. But it's the utilitarian principle. Social responsibility. Well, profit responsibility. It's the company's duty to preserve itself. So there is a profit responsibility. People depend on the company, not just the customers for the product, which they enjoy and want and demand and pay for, but also the workers and the management, and also all the ancillary trades and professions that feed into the company. There might be a whole network of people who benefit from the company. So it's important that the company makes a profit so that it's able to sustain itself and therefore sustain the livelihoods of the people who work for the company directly and indirectly. It is necessary to be careful about profiteering. That's selling an essential good at an inflated price, simply because people need the good. Often quoted in this case is ethical pharmaceuticals. Drug companies make products, and then the products are sold at very high prices because we need the products. But there again, the company has to engage in very expensive research and development. So if the company doesn't make a profit, the company will not exist. So we won't have any drugs to solve our medical problems. If the companies go out of business, there won't be any drugs available for us on the market. So there are tensions, there are trade-offs, there are dilemmas to be dealt with when we consider ethical issues. There's also stakeholder responsibility, companies' duty to protect the interest of the people who gain from it. It's important that the stakeholders are catered for. The stakeholders are very wide-ranging. If you like, you could divide them into core stakeholders and non-core. The core stakeholders being, let's say, the employees of the business, the shareholders, the management. But there are others. There's the suppliers of raw material, the people who make the capital equipment for the business, the customers who buy the product. There are many others who are involved, and it's important that the company is run with stakeholders in mind. What's the right way to conduct itself in view of the requirements of its stakeholders? Now, there are problems here as well, because sometimes the stakeholders' interests clash. Investors in the business want a good return on their investment, and they want security of investment. Customers want the product as cheaply as possible. They want good quality and as cheap as possible. Well, there's a clash. There's a contradiction. How is that resolved? And in a way, what all of this does is it highlights the need for management to be compromisers, to try and find middle courses, ones that satisfy the stakeholders in general. They have to balance all of the various requirements. There's also a societal responsibility. Companies have a duty to preserve the environment, not to pollute it. But also the company has a requirement earlier on. The first one we met was the profit responsibility. Well, the more it spends on cleaning up after itself and looking after the environment, the less profits there will be. Again, there's a tension, there's a clash between societal responsibility and profit responsibility. It falls to the management to try and find a compromise, find a way around this. But we can see there are clashes there. We need the companies to supply the products. We need the companies to supply employment. So we need the companies. On the other hand, we don't want to think of them exploiting us as customers. We don't want to think of them making big profits at our expense. We don't want them destroying the climate and the earth in which we live. But there are all sorts of contradictions involved in all of those issues. And this idea of green marketing, trying to project itself as a caring organisation. There is corporate social responsibility. The idea of portraying itself and acting in a way that sustains the environment and gains customers' respect out of how it deals with the environment and deals with issues in the environment. Areas of responsibility. Well, we have societal responsibility. We've just talked about that in terms of the way in which the business operates in the society. If it pollutes the environment or pollutes the local environment or creates noise or traffic congestion, or how does it behave within the society? And then we have stakeholder responsibility. It has a responsibility to all the stakeholders, the workers, the customers, the shareholders, the management. It's got a wide range of responsibilities to the stakeholders. There's an ecological environment as well, how it deals with the environment in particular, and looks after its employees. It's important that they're taken into account, not just in terms of being stakeholders, but in terms of people who work day in, day out for the good of the business. The general public who receive the products and must have confidence in the products meet their requirements. But the company also does this in a way that is a cooperation with the general society, that the company works within the society the same as people live within the society. So the company should not upset the people. And there are the customers or the consumers of the product. They should not be cheated. They should be respected. The product should be good quality and delivered at a price and at a time that meets with the requirements of the consumers. There are interest groups in society. These may be consumer groups who want to see more information about the product being published, and they want to see certain products being produced in a different way because it's more environmentally friendly. They want to deal with issues of noise and traffic congestion created by the companies. They want to deal with all sorts of issues about how the company deals with subsidiaries overseas and how workforces perhaps overseas related to the company are treated, that they have good terms of employment and they're looked after and so on. And of course there's the suppliers. And the suppliers are important because without them there will not be the supplies to make the product. So they must be looked after and treated with respect. So companies have got a lot to think about. They've got moral issues across a wide variety of situations, and they must deal with different groups, and they must deal with them honestly and openly. But sometimes, as I said earlier, there are conflicts. There are issues between the groups. There are conflicts. The shareholders want a return on their investment. They want high profits. Customers want to pay as little as possible. Suppliers want a high price for their supplies, but the customers still want it as cheaply as possible, and so on. So we have the profit responsibility of the organization. When all of those have balanced, the company must preserve itself. It must continue. And to do that, it must make a profit, not only for reinvestment purposes, but because the owners of the business want to get a return. That's why they invested in the business in the first place. They must get at least what they would have got had they put their money into the bank or into some alternative form of investment. If they don't, they'll want to get out of this company, they'll want to sell the company, they'll want to close it down, liquidate it, get their money back if they can, and reinvest somewhere else. So if the company is going to continue, it must make profits. Unethical behaviour. Now this includes all sorts, and I'll just give you a simple list. We could carry on all day filling out this almost. There are so many we can think of, and this list I'm going to give you is not near adequate, but nonetheless it's a feeling for the type of unethical behaviour. For example, filling out warranty claims after the period expires. It's lying, in other words. People do it, or may do it, in terms of cars. The warranties run out, but they try to make a claim and claim it was the claim was at a date before the warranty ran out. It's cheating. It's lying. It's unethical. Returning merchandise fraudulently, perhaps taking the product, using the product, and then returning it and expecting their money back. Providing inaccurate credit information. When they're looking for a loan or looking for finance, they lie. They lie about their circumstances. Stealing music from the internet, downloading it, downloading films. They haven't paid to see the film. The people who paid are the investors in the film, the people who put the money into making the film in the first place. And if people are just downloading it for free, that's cheating. It's cheating the people who invested. It's stealing. Submitting a phony insurance claim that some item was broken when in fact it wasn't broken, or some item was stolen when on holiday when in fact it wasn't. There was no such item. It's cheating, it's lying, it's immoral. Improper improper disposal of environmentally sensitive material. People fly tipping chemicals into rivers, or tipping items just because it's free. They see it as free. Somebody else will clean up the mess. Somebody else will pay for it. It's cheating. It's unethical. These all lead to higher prices and higher premiums on insurance and so on. But as I said, we could go through this list for ages. We can carry on adding to it. There are so many different ways in which fraudulent and illegal and immoral behaviour manifest themselves in the market. It's a tragedy that the human species, are prone to this type of behaviour, but I suppose no one is perfect. But some people have got a predisposition to cheating and lying and trying to get something for nothing. There is pressure on business people to make decisions in a society with diverse value systems. The diverse value systems means, unfortunately, that some people don't have high moral positions. They don't mind stealing from the company, or cheating the company, or lying about the product, or even damaging the reputation of the company when it's not justified. It's like blackmail. If they try to return an item to the company saying that the product was not suitable and they want their money back, when in fact they've used the product, and the company refuses, they might engage in a campaign online of vilification. They try to ruin the reputation of the business. People have diverse value systems. We can identify big macro ones, being different religious backgrounds and different cultures and so on. And then we can also identify, tragically, the immoral ones. These are also a subset of society. The right to safety, to be informed, to choose, and to be heard. These are rights that we like to think apply. And we like to think we've got rights to safety, that when we buy a product it's not going to hurt us. We've a right to be informed by the company about the product. We've a right to choose between different products, how to spend our money. And when it goes wrong, we've a right to be heard by the company or by the agents of the company and make legitimate claims, but not to lie and to cheat or attempt to cheat the company and lie about the quality of the product. But we have legitimate rights in the sense of expecting to be safe, to be informed, to choose, and to be heard. Moral idealism. Now these are just selected concepts. Well, moral idealism is a personal moral philosophy that considers certain individual rights and duties as universal, regardless of the outcome. Now these are just selected terms and concepts I'm putting in here because we'll often hear about moral idealism and wonder what it is. Well, what it is simply an absolute. Moral idealism is that we have absolute rights regarding some things. Now, it's difficult to know what we've an absolute right for. People would say we have an absolute right to live and not to be persecuted. But have we an absolute right to say anything we want? Because free speech may be conditional upon factors such as hurting other people, hurting their opinions, or hurting their understanding of tolerance and what's allowed and what's not allowed. So perhaps when we talk about free speech, we have a right to free speech, but we should also be wary not to insult other people. Green marketing is another term we often come across. Marketing efforts to produce and promote and reclaim environmentally sensitive products. We're trying to promote products which will degrade quickly in the environment, which will not use up too much of the resources of the planet in their production. They're environmentally friendly products, and companies try to have a green agenda, try to make products as efficiently as possible and to save on the resources of the planet, to reduce its carbon footprint. We hear the term social auditing. A social audit is a systematic assessment of a firm's objectives and strategies and performance in the domain of social responsibility. So in other words, it's looking into the company, doing a social audit, looking at what the company is doing to see if it's attempting to reduce its carbon footprint, its impact on the environment, its impact on the local community. It's looking into how sensitive the organization is to the wider concerns about the environment and about the climate and about the planet on which we live. So it's looking into the company and its processes. A social audit is trying to collect data and information about companies and how they practice business. Ethics. Well, the study of ethics is the study of moral principles and values that govern the actions and decisions of individual groups. So ethics, as I said right at the start, is similar to the theory of morality. It's really the province of philosophy. Morality tends to be the practical end of our considerations. So if we lie about a product, for example, that's not moral. We've lied about the product or about its qualities. That's not moral. Why is lying not moral? We would have to look to ethics, the subject ethics, to find out why lying is not moral. Laws. Laws are society's values and standards that are enforceable in the courts. Well, the laws also tend to reflect the society's morality. In certain societies, their legal system will permit activities which in another society would not be allowed. So it depends on the society, it depends on the culture of the society. The culture of the society is its morality. It's a set of people with certain moral principles, and that sort of constitutes their culture, and their culture then is enshrined in law, so that becomes their legal system. So certain behaviour is allowed and certain behaviour is not allowed according to cultures, and that will creep in to their legal system and be enacted in laws. An illustration of this whole idea is the American Consumer Bill of Rights in 1962. Just look at the contents here and try and compare them with what we've been talking about. It includes buyers' rights, the right to safety. Well, we'd accept that. When we buy a product, we don't expect the product to hurt us. If it does hurt us, then the producer has been lying about its safety and about its characteristics. So we expect it to be safe. We have to rely on what the producer has said about the product. And if we believe the producer, we buy the product, then we expect to be safe. We expect to be informed about products. We expect to be informed if products are dangerous or how to use the products, how to set up the product and how to use it properly. We expect to be informed accurately by the producer. It shouldn't be experimental, and we shouldn't be allowed to set up products which are dangerous and which could be injurious to us when we put them into use. The right to choose. We should be able to choose between different products. We shouldn't be forced to buy something. It would be wrong if the country, the legal system, the police forced us to buy certain items. We don't think like that. We have a right to choose between different products. And a right to be heard. In other words, when we have a problem, we should be able to vent the problem. We should be able to seek redress. We should be able to make our voice heard, and the company or the producer should be held to account and explain why the product did not meet our requirements. We also hear things like code of ethics. Well, a code of ethics is a formal statement of ethical principles and conducts and rules of conduct. A code of ethics. Companies may have a code of ethics. They may decide to publish their code of ethics, their principles. It may be incorporated in their mission statement, for example. They may say that they are committed to honesty, openness, safety, environmentally responsible production. They may set out what their code of ethics is. And we can judge the company then in terms of the extent to which it's met its own code of ethics. And the code of ethics is a list of what it believes is the right thing to do. We also come across terms like whistleblowers. Whistleblowers are employees who report the unethical or illegal action of their employers. We think of employees having responsibility to the organisations and trusting the organisations, and also maintaining confidentiality within organisations, not exposing confidential documents, for example. But what if the confidential documents contained evidence of malpractice or of illegal behaviour by the senior management? Should those documents be released to the public? On the one hand, the employee has a duty to maintain confidentiality. That's what they contracted with the employer. On the other hand, they have a right to inform the public that there is a wrongdoing that's being covered up by the organisation. And if they do release it, they become known as whistleblowers. That is the term that's used. I mentioned utilitarianism earlier. Well, it's a personal moral philosophy that focuses on the greatest good for the greatest number by assessing the costs and benefits of the consequences of ethical behaviour. In other words, we decide what's good or what's bad according to the number of people who are positively affected and the number of people who are adversely affected. And generally speaking, the greater the number who benefit, those are the ones who are favoured by this particular philosophy. It's widely used in economics. Utilitarianism is widely used in economic model building and in economic principles. But that's the subject of other videos in different modules. But utilitarianism is one way in which we can judge moral action to see if it's acceptable or not. Has a greater number benefited from the change than who have lost? If bigger numbers benefit than lose, then the action is condoned. Social responsibility means that organisations are part of a larger society and are accountable to that society for their actions. So it's important that that organisations see themselves as a part of society, and they must be accountable to that society in terms of its morality, in terms of its codes of practice and of its legal system. the organizations are not outside the law. They're not outside even the moral codes of the society. They must conform, because that's what the dominant culture expects. That's what the legal system within that country expects. So it's for companies to adhere to that. Now, we've looked at a lot of issues here. Most of them are just clarifying points, like the last part of this particular class, just clarifying what's meant by utilitarianism and whistleblowing and so on. And the earlier parts was looking at the whole idea of what is right and what is wrong within business, and particularly the importance of marketing in projecting what is legal, decent and honest about the product, informing the consumer honestly and openly about the product, and also looking at the dilemmas that confront organizations in terms of the tensions they've got between, on the one hand, sustaining itself, the profit responsibility, and on the other hand, meeting the obligations in society and trying to offer value for money to the customers. So there are many issues, and unfortunately the study of customer ethics and the study of ethics in general doesn't really give us answers. It gives us debates about ethics and what's right and what's wrong and what people believe and don't believe, but they don't actually give us a formula for calculating what is right. So there don't seem to be absolutes. What we have are situations that arise, and we try to work out what is the best course of action given the situation, but we don't have overriding values based on big philosophical insights. What we have instead are just debates and ideas. That doesn't mean we shouldn't study ethics. We should, because they help us to think about conflicts and about dilemmas that we talked about, like earlier, and profitability and so on. But we shouldn't expect there to be definitive answers. So it's quite an important area about what is right, what is wrong, what's the right thing to do. It's important that companies understand it and work with it, but realizing that ultimately there are no, as I said, definitive answers. Well, that's all I'm going to deal with in this session. It's been quite a long session, so I'll leave it at that and say thank you for watching.